The dank air of the subterranean cavern system clung to Finn Morrow's skin like a second layer of rot, as he cautiously made his way deeper into the twisting tunnels. Each step squelched beneath his boots, the ground a spongy mass of decaying matter that seemed to pulse with an unnatural life of its own. Finn's flashlight beam danced across the cavern walls, revealing glistening tendrils of some unknown organic substance that writhed and undulated in response to the light. The young geologist had come to these caves to study unusual mineral formations, but what he found defied all scientific explanation. As Finn ventured further, the oppressive silence was broken only by the occasional drip of moisture and the soft, unsettling sounds of movement from the very walls themselves. His mind raced with theories, each more outlandish than the last, as he tried to rationalize the impossible environment surrounding him. The air grew thicker, filled with spores that danced in his flashlight beam, and Finn found himself struggling to maintain his composure. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, studying him with the same intensity he usually reserved for his geological specimens. A sudden noise from behind caused Finn to whirl around, his heart pounding in his chest. The beam of his flashlight illuminated the figure of Felix Rotherham, his research assistant, who had insisted on accompanying him on this expedition. Felix's face was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Finn," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I've never seen anything like this. It's as if the entire cave system is alive." Finn nodded grimly, unable to shake the feeling that they had stumbled upon something far beyond their understanding. As they pressed on, the cavern began to change. The organic matter coating the walls grew more complex, forming patterns that almost resembled circuitry or the neural pathways of some vast alien brain. Finn found his scientific curiosity warring with an increasing sense of dread. He had come here seeking knowledge, but now he wondered if some knowledge was better left undiscovered. The air grew warmer, humid with the breath of decay, and Finn could have sworn he heard a distant rhythmic pulsing, like the heartbeat of some monstrous entity. Suddenly, the narrow passage opened into a vast chamber that defied comprehension. The ceiling arched high above, lost in shadows, while the floor dropped away into a yawning chasm. And there, suspended in the center of the chamber, was a massive, pulsating organ-like structure that seemed to be the source of all the organic growth they had encountered. As Finn and Felix stood transfixed by the sight, a low, resonant hum filled the air, and tendrils of rot began to creep towards them with purpose. In that moment, Finn realized their expedition had taken a turn into the realm of nightmares, and the true horror of the Rot Mother's domain was about to reveal itself. As the tendrils of rot crept closer, Finn's scientific instincts battled with his growing terror. He grabbed Felix's arm, pulling him back from the edge of the chasm. "We need to collect samples," Finn said, his voice barely steady. "Whatever this is, it's unlike anything in recorded biology." Felix nodded numbly, his eyes never leaving the pulsating mass at the chamber's center. With trembling hands, they began to take samples of the organic matter, each touch of the spongy, warm substance sending shivers of revulsion through their bodies. Hours seemed to pass as they worked, though time felt distorted in the depths of the cavern. Finn noticed with growing unease that the wounds left by their sample collection seemed to heal almost instantly, the rot flowing like liquid to fill the gaps. Even more disturbing, he could have sworn the tendrils were growing more numerous, more insistent in their approach. Felix's behavior, too, was becoming erratic. He muttered to himself, eyes darting wildly, and more than once Finn caught him staring at the central mass with an unsettling mixture of fear and longing. As they prepared to leave the chamber, a low melodic humming filled the air. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, reverberating through their bodies and setting their teeth on edge. Finn felt a pressure building in his mind, as if something vast and alien were pressing against the boundaries of his consciousness. Images began to flash before his eyes, visions of rot spreading across the world, of humanity transformed into something unrecognizable. of a new order rising from the decay of the old. He shook his head violently, trying to clear the visions, but they clung to him like the spores in the air. "We need to get out of here," Finn gasped, grabbing Felix's shoulder, but his assistant didn't move. Felix stood transfixed, a thin line of drool running from the corner of his mouth, eyes glazed and unfocused. When he finally turned to Finn, his expression was one of rapturous wonder. "Can't you hear it, Finn?" he whispered. "The Rot Mother, Ma, she's calling to us. She wants to show us the way." Before Finn could react, Felix lurched forward, stumbling towards the edge of the chasm. Finn lunged, managing to grab Felix's jacket just as he teetered on the brink. For a moment, they struggled at the edge of the abyss, Felix trying to throw himself in, Finn desperately holding on. With a final, desperate heave, Finn pulled Felix back from the edge. They collapsed to the ground, panting. But as Finn looked up, his blood ran cold. The chamber had changed. The walls pulsed with increased vigor, and the tendrils of rot had formed a near-impenetrable web around them. The central mass had grown, its pulsations more rapid, more urgent. And there, emerging from the organic morass, Finn saw something that defied description. A face, or something like a face, forming in the rot. Eyes that weren't eyes regarded them with alien intelligence, and a mouth that wasn't a mouth opened in a silent scream. As Finn's mind reeled, teetering on the edge of sanity, he realized with horror that their escape might already be too late. The Rot Mother was awakening, and she had taken notice of her visitors. The cavern trembled with a bone-deep resonance as the Rot Mother's consciousness fully awakened. Finn, still gripping Felix's arm, watched in horror as the walls of the chamber began to flow like viscous liquid, closing off their escape route. The air grew thick with spores, each breath filling their lungs with the essence of decay. Felix's eyes rolled back in his head, his body convulsing as if in the throes of a seizure. "Felix!" Finn shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the grotesque symphony of squelching, pulsating flesh surrounding them. Suddenly, Felix went rigid, his eyes snapping open. But the eyes that stared back at Finn were not his friends. They swirled with an otherworldly intelligence, pupils expanding until they consumed the entire eye. When Felix spoke, his voice was a horrifying blend of his own, and something ancient, resonant, and undeniably female. "My child," the voice crooned through Felix's mouth, "you have come home at last." Finn recoiled, his mind screaming in denial, but he couldn't look away from the terrifying transformation taking place before him. The massive, organ-like structure at the center of the chamber began to shift and contort, taking on an almost humanoid shape. Tendrils of rot shot out, wrapping around Finn and Felix, pulling them inexorably towards the nightmarish form. Finn struggled against the slimy bonds, his scientific mind desperately trying to rationalize what was happening, even as his sanity frayed at the edges. "What are you?" he screamed, terror and fascination warring within him. The Rot Mother's laugh echoed through the cavern, a sound of decay and rebirth, of endings and horrifying new beginnings. As they were drawn closer to the central mass, Finn felt a presence invade his mind. Images flooded his consciousness. Civilizations rising and falling, consumed by rot only to be reborn in new twisted forms. He saw the cycle of decay and renewal played out on a cosmic scale, with the Rot Mother as its architect and guardian. The sheer scope of the visions threatened to shatter Finn's sanity. He could feel his sense of self being eroded, replaced by an expanding awareness of rot and its role in the universe. In a final, desperate attempt to resist, Finn reached for his sample kit. His fingers closed around a vial of powerful fungicide he had brought as a precaution. With a hoarse cry, he smashed the vial against the nearest tendril. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The Rot Mother's scream of pain reverberated through the chamber, shaking loose stalactites from the ceiling. The tendrils holding Finn and Felix recoiled, momentarily freeing them. But as Finn turned to flee, dragging the still-possessed Felix with him, he felt something fundamental shift within himself. The Rot Mother's voice echoed in his mind, no longer speaking through Felix, but addressing Finn directly. Run if you must, my chosen one. But you cannot escape your destiny. The seed of rot has been planted within you. As chunks of the ceiling began to rain down around them, Finn realized that escaping the cavern might be only the beginning of his nightmare. Finn's lungs burned as he half-dragged, half-carried the semi-conscious Felix through the twisting tunnels of the cave system. The walls still pulsed with organic life, but the fungicide's effects were evident in the blackened, withering tendrils that reached for them with diminishing strength. The rot mother's agonized screams had faded to a distant, unsettling hum that seemed to resonate within Finn's very bones. As they stumbled through the darkness, Finn's mind reeled from the horrors they had witnessed and the terrifying implications of the rot mother's parting words. After what felt like hours of frantic flight, they finally emerged from the cave entrance into the stark light of day. Finn collapsed onto the ground, gasping for fresh air, while Felix lay motionless beside him. As Finn's eyes adjusted to the sunlight, he noticed with growing horror that the vegetation surrounding the cave entrance was different, corrupted. Plants that should have been lush and green were instead a sickly array of purples and blacks, their forms twisted into unnatural shapes. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The rot was spreading, and they had been its unwitting carriers. As the adrenaline of their escape began to fade, Finn became acutely aware of a strange sensation within his own body. There was an itching beneath his skin, a feeling of something squirming in his veins. With trembling hands, he examined his arms, choking back a scream as he saw faint, web-like patterns of discoloration spreading beneath his skin. The seed of rot, as the rot mother had called it, was no metaphor. Finn felt a wave of nausea as he contemplated the transformation that might be taking place within him. Felix began to stir, groaning weakly. As he opened his eyes, Finn was relieved to see that they had returned to normal, the swirling blackness gone. "Finn!" Felix croaked, his voice hoarse and confused. What happened down there?" Finn opened his mouth to respond, but found he had no words to adequately describe the cosmic horror they had encountered. How could he explain the rot mother, the visions of universal decay and rebirth, the terrifying possibility that they might now be agents of that very corruption? As Felix struggled to sit up, wincing at the brightness of the sun, Finn made a decision. They couldn't risk spreading whatever they had encountered to the wider world. He reached for his satellite phone with shaking hands, intending to call for a quarantine team. But as he dialed, a new, horrifying thought struck him. What if this was exactly what the rot mother wanted? What if, by involving others, they would only be facilitating the spread of her influence? The phone slipped from Finn's grasp as the magnitude of their situation truly hit him. They were trapped between two impossible choices: risk spreading the rot, or face whatever transformation awaited them alone. As Finn looked out at the corrupted landscape around them, he realized that their escape from the cavern was only the beginning of a much larger, more terrifying journey. As the days passed in their self-imposed quarantine, Finn watched with a mixture of fascination and horror as the changes within him progressed. The web-like patterns beneath his skin spread, forming intricate, almost beautiful designs that pulsed with an inner light. He found he could sense the rot in the environment around him, feeling its ebb and flow like a sixth sense. Felix, on the other hand, seemed to be deteriorating. His body rejected the rot, breaking out in fevered sweats and painful oozing sores. One night, as Finn tended to Felix's worsening condition, he felt a familiar presence brush against his mind. The rot mother's voice, once terrifying, now felt almost soothing. "My chosen one," she whispered. "It is time for you to understand your true purpose." Finn's resistance crumbled as visions flooded his consciousness. He saw the rot not as decay, but as a force of change and renewal. Civilizations rose and fell, but the rot remained, guiding the course of evolution itself. He saw himself at the center of it all, a conduit for this cosmic force. As the visions faded, Finn looked down at Felix with new eyes. He realized now why his friend was suffering. Felix had been a test, a vessel for the rot mother to communicate. but Finn was the true heir. With a clarity that both thrilled and terrified him, Finn understood what he had to do. Gently, he placed his hands on Felix's fevered brow. The rot flowed from Finn into Felix, not to corrupt, but to heal in its own twisted way. Felix's eyes flew open, clear for the first time in days, filled with a mixture of awe and subservience. "We have work to do," Finn said, his voice resonating with newfound power. He could feel the rot spreading beyond their quarantine, calling to him. The world was ripe for renewal, for the next stage of evolution, and he would be its shepherd. As he stepped outside their shelter, the corrupted vegetation seemed to bow towards him, recognizing its new master. Finn felt a moment of vertigo as he straddled two worlds, the old one he was leaving behind, and the new one he would help create. As Finn and Felix prepared to venture back into the world, the full weight of Finn's transformation settled upon him. He was no longer just Finn Morrow, curious geologist. He was the heir of the Rot Mother, the harbinger of a new age of decay and rebirth. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with both wonder and horror. As they walked away from the site of their ordeal, Finn felt the pulse of the rot beneath his feet, spreading outward in all directions. A smile played at the corners of his mouth, equal parts excitement and terror, as he contemplated the monumental task ahead. The world as they knew it was ending, and Finn would be the architect of what came next. The Rot Mother's embrace had changed him forever, and now he would change everything else.